mandates from the European Union. In total, we've done about 2.1 billion euros in the region, and we're really proud of that. And I would also like to say that especially now, where not only climate action is particularly needed, as the region, of course, since many years suffers from climate change, but we also notice that the region is just coming out of a devastating COVID crisis. And that together really, I think, requires a lot of support, a lot of action, and EIB is here to help. And it is the crop of implementation. So I'm very happy that today we're not only talking policies and strategies, but we are also talking projects. And there are two concrete projects that I will mention, but there is much more to talk about in the next hour and a half. Now, let me also say that the water sector, and I'm particularly focusing on water today, is at the core of EIB's activities since 1960s. And we've done about 1,600 projects across the globe worth about 80 billion euros. So you can imagine that only by the size of it, comparing it to our institution, this is a very important sector. And we also think, at least that's what we claim, we are the largest lender in the global water sector. So that's why today's panel is extremely important, because we're going to talk about the region and we're going to talk about water. And we believe that these two things are inherently connected. Now, when I look at the water sector, and especially the things that we are doing in connection with a clean ocean, we have a new program, the Clean and Sustainable Ocean Program, which consists of two legs. The Clean Oceans Initiative, which many of you will know, it's an initiative that we're doing in partnership with the European Union and with other implementing partners, especially bilateral and multilateral development banks. And then there is also the Blue Sustainable Ocean Strategy, Blue SOS, which is much more focusing on strategic initiatives and projects in 4 key sectors. One is green maritime transport, but then there is sustainable seafood production, and there is also sustainable coastal protection, which we believe are absolutely crucial for the health of the economy and the livelihood in that region. There's also a 4th sector, which is also important, which relates much more to research, development, and innovation, like, for instance, monitoring and data collection in the region to actually track better climate change and the devastating implication it has on the region. Now, let me mention 2 concrete projects that I think are quite good to introduce this panel. A concrete example is, for instance, that we did a quite, for us, important transaction with Barbados about, it was in 2020, 12 million euros loan to actually totally rework and upgrade the water distribution network in the island to improve drinking water availability, service quality, and also enhance the resilience to mitigate the adverse effects of climate change. And then there is a new transaction that we've just recently approved, and we are very proud of that, which is a new Caribbean Water Sanitation and Clean Ocean Program loan, 150 million euros, which can be implemented with different partners. One of them is the Caribbean Development Bank, our long-standing and prime partner in the region, but then also this program loan can be implemented with other countries, islands, and we are really happy and proud that this transaction will come its way to create impact on the ground. It's important to note that this transaction will be combined with a 17 million euro grant from the European Union under the Caribbean Investment Facility, and that is mainly in connections with technical assistance and concrete investment grants to kickstart projects. I would like to conclude here and just pass on the message to my dear colleague Christine Lang to actually kickstart the panel. I will be very curious to listen to all of you, and I thank you very much for your attention this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Christoph. I appreciate you stepping in and giving the introduction. Now, today I want to introduce the panel, and I think most people, have dealt with alphabetical order. And so for once, Felice, you're first. So I want to start with Felice Zacchero, who's the head of unit from INPA and is an extremely important partner for Team Europe for the EIB. Next, we have Colin Young, who's on my left, from the 5Cs, who's the executive director. Then we have Eddie Vasquez, who is Director Parley for Oceans from the Dominican Republic. And last, well, Daniel Best for last, from the Caribbean Development Bank, where he's the director for projects. It's really a pleasure to lead a panel where we have been working together in different ways on this important topic. Okay, I don't know what's going on outside, but anyway, we will try to talk over the excitement outside with that. So today we're going to start off with Colin setting the scene so we can really understand the extent of the issue in the region. And then I'll be asking some questions to our panel members, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. I'd like it to be interactive, so feel free to interrupt whenever you want. If you have something that you want to add or you disagree with someone says, feel free to speak up. So I'd pass it over now to Colin. If you could just give us some perspective, set the scene for the region and what not just the challenges, but the opportunities. Because I think that we need to focus on not just what needs to be done, but really look at it in the positive sense that there's a real opportunity to make a difference.
Thank you. Oh. Thank you, Kristen. And first, I want to thank the EIB for the invitation to be a part of this panel, along with my colleagues. And so my job, I think, is relatively easy in terms of setting the scene and then to talk about some possibilities. So it is no secret that the Caribbean is at the front line of the climate crisis. We're absolutely one of the most vulnerable areas in the world to the effects of climate change. But since this panel is about water and sanitation, then I think it's good to start with a little bit of what we know about the science. And first is that 7 of the top 30 water scarce countries are found in the Caribbean, in CARICOM. And Barbados is one of the top 10 most water scarce countries in the world. When we look at the projections, as early as 2030, 2050, and then by 2100, we note that the Caribbean is going to become a drier region. In some areas, from 20 to 30% less rainfall. That is absolutely going to be significant. And then almost all of our countries will move up into the water scarce and multiple into the top 10. So obviously how we treat this valuable resource is absolutely very important as part of our resilience. And the implications are many. There are countries like Belize, for example, that rely on hydro electricity to generate quite a bit of its energy resources. What does a 30% reduction in rainfall mean for hydro generation by 2050, by 2070, 2080? So the interrelation between water and other development aspirations is very important. Then, obviously, in terms of the temperature, we also see these things are positively correlated, right? As global surface temperature, ambient temperature increases, it gets a lot drier. And we're also seeing that under various scenarios, the Caribbean is going to become a lot warmer. In fact, by as early as 2050, under various scenarios, we're looking at a 1.5 increase in temperature. And if nothing is done in terms of cutting emissions in line with the science, 45% by 2030 and net zero by 2050, we are looking at as high as 3.05 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And there's one other issue that I want to raise before I go into some of the opportunities, because these things are all interrelated, and that is the impact of sea level rise. So what does sea level rise have to do with water access and availability? Well, as we are expecting that by the end of the century, we'll see a 1 meter increase in sea level rise across the Caribbean. Not only will we significantly impact water infrastructure and utilities that are right in the coastal zone, but the aquifers will become salinized. They're further, in a sense, threatening our water supply and requiring additional resources now to undertake expensive desalinization for water. So that is the context where it is clear, very vulnerable, it's going to become worse, and then you put in sea level rise, we have a triple threat. So what are the opportunities? So obviously, one of the challenges that we find, so before I go to the opportunities, is the fact that a significant amount of the effort around water is adaptation. And because it's adaptation, generally these fall into the public goods type category, and it's difficult to then make a business case with a very clear rate of return on the investment for water infrastructure. So it is challenging now to crowd in private sector investments to do that. MDBs, however, have a role to play in terms of partnering with countries that can have access to grant resources, like from the Green Climate Fund or the Adaptation Fund, to do quite a bit of the de-risking in some of the investments, and then the MDBs can come in and scale the investments. There's opportunities for partnership among the MDBs so that you reduce your risks among all of the players that are coming in. And we've seen, for example, in Barbados, which I'll talk about later, how we were able to use GCF resources to de-risk a large part of the investments, and then MDBs became very interested in completing the last mile or scaling the project. So obviously, this is complicated also by the issue of debt and the fact that countries have to undergo further debt to be able to invest in water adaptation or water resilience infrastructure. So how, again, by using access to data and ensuring that there's the data infrastructure where we can reduce the risk so that the MDBs, and in those instances where the private sector can come in, it's very important that we understand that. We also have to fix the fact that there are demand-side constraints in our countries in terms of taking advantage of the opportunities and being able to deal with the regulatory environment that is going to be important for crowding in investments from MDBs. Then finally, in terms of the role of blended finance, I think is a very huge opportunity where you can blend recurrent revenues, grant resources, and then with loans, concessional financing, and maybe that's what Danielle will talk about, because obviously when you looked at the debt to GDP ratio and the fact that most of our countries fall within the middle income category and thereby don't qualify for concessional financing, even it's a challenge then to, as I said, invest in water adaptation and resilience because of the debt to GDP situation. But when you blend the resources where you can use grant resources and some loans at concessional rates, I think there's the potential to really invest in building water resilience. So I will stop there, Kristen.
Thank you very much. I mean, you've highlighted a lot of the issues that are there in terms of year-round being able to have the access to water. And when we talk about the situation of the equipment, the pipes, the unmetered consumption, the high energy costs, inadequate wastewater treatment, and then the unsustainable tariffs, which relates to not being able to cover the operating costs and therefore the degradation of the infrastructure. So I'd like to now move to Eddie, so at the other end of the panel, and ask you, you come from the Dominican Republic, which is a picturesque island. It's hard to think of an island having a water shortage and having that sort of issue. But when we were mentioning the case of the desalination, when you have in the Caribbean 12% of the water supply coming from the desalination, and we are already seeing through the UNEP study that it has environmental risks, that the issue of the brine and the damage to the ecosystem. So how do you see, as the challenges from the perspective of the Dominican Republic in the water and sanitation sector, and how has climate change been exacerbating the situation?
Yeah. Here, do you hear me? No?
You have to take off the red light. Once the red light comes off.
Okay. Okay. No. No. No.
Perfect. So thank you very much for the invitation first. And maybe getting back to your point, it's very difficult to talk to people when island countries has water shortage problems. I mean, many people think that living in an island means that you are surrounded by water, which is true, but not all water available is for use, right? So we have a lot of crops, we have a lot of population, we have a lot of systems that depends on let's say fresh water, mains of all. And this make it really hard. For the Dominican Republic, taking into consideration the situation that we have right now, we have some specific challenges regarding, I will say, 3 different points. The first one will be policies and legislation around water. The Dominican Republic has many policies around water use, but these policies are, let's say, with different kind of mechanism that doesn't belong to a, let's call it, mother law of water. The Congress of the Dominican Republic has had for many years in their cabinets the water law that hasn't still been approved, and that has made it very difficult for us to have better governance for water from the public institutions, but also many other long-term planning under a transformational perspective that are needed in order to take care of the different issues that we have right now regarding water sanitation and water use in the Dominican Republic. Let's say that if we agree in order to have a water legislation in the country, that will unlock a lot of possible partnerships and a lot of possible possibilities that the country can take up forward in order to take advantage of these opportunities. But since 2020, the government did something pretty interesting that was creating the first cabinet of water that reunited the Ministry of the Environment of the Dominican Republic, but also with other water-related institutions in the country. And that helped really good in order to see which were the challenges and the opportunities and the state of the art of the country. Taking into consideration that we have different organizations, both from the public and the public-private perspective in the country that are related to the water supply, but also to the water quality and studies. There's sometimes a very, let's say, difficult way to understand how water governance is organized into the country, as there's no one main organization leading with it. So this cabinet of water can help and has been helping a lot to see under a multi-stakeholder consultation process, which are the problems, what are the solutions, and what are the resources needed in order for us as a country to face this situation. Second of all, besides legislation and public policies, I will go to infrastructure development. Taking into consideration that we are living the challenges of climate change on an everyday basis, we need more of an adaptation-based perspectives, which was bring before in the conversation, but not on their short-term perspective, but long-term perspectives. And those long-term perspectives that usually come with transformational adaptations are the difficult ones in order to implement. And that put it very hard when there's no planning for water due to the lack of governance in the country. So the third point will be investment, and investment is really needed in order for us to tackle both legislation and also infrastructure. But this investment needs to come in a way that is also resilience for the climate risks that the countries is facing on a daily basis. We are seeing every day, for example, 10 days ago, the Santo Domingo province has a mass flooding in just a couple of hours of rainings. And that, taking into consideration the water treatment process of the city as well, created like a really huge chaos. 9 people died out of that devastation in just a couple of hours. And that really, I bring this fact on mind because that really helped us to remind which are the histories and the faces behind this crisis that we're actually seeing in these negotiations right here. So it's not only about the opportunity, the real challenges that we are having, but also the opportunity to improve people's lives through these transformational adaptation processes. And also taking into consideration that the Dominican Republic is one of the growing countries, let's say one of the countries that in the Latin American Caribbean area grows on a very fast scale, and where tourism has a very, let's say, demanding use of water as well. There's many limitations on how to keep up with the demand that right now, both in the agriculture but also the tourist sector, are demanding for water use. So we have tourists, we have agriculture, we have sanitation, and we have most of all rural people in communities that are having many problems to access water as well. So once we are able to see legislation, to see infrastructure, and to see investment in a way that we can have, we can de-risk these different challenges that we are facing on a daily basis due to climate change, we're going to be able to look the complete picture and also to take advantage. Even though that I've been saying these things in the last 10 years, the Dominican Republic has had a lot of advancement regarding water policies in the country. There has been many multiple stakeholder organizations that has been involved in the process, and we are on a better perspective than 10 years ago. But there's still a long way ahead. We are having a lot of growth as a country in many different economical sectors, and that's a huge opportunity for us to develop a system that allowed us to respond to the demand that we are currently having, but also with a perspective on green technologies that allowed us to go ahead with these problems.
Thank you. I think we all left that summary of the Dominican Republic probably thinking that it's not only the Dominican Republic that has those issues, that many of the countries could benefit from that. In the Caribbean, 85% of wastewater enters untreated the Caribbean Sea. I think it's something quite difficult to think about, but that's a large percentage that is not treated. And the PAO did a study, and 51.5% households lack sewer connection. So what you were saying, Eddie, about going back to the individual, just think about the individual that doesn't have the sewer connection. And only 17% in the Caribbean are connected to adequate collection and treatment systems, and this is back in 2017, and I imagine not so much has evolved. So this gives you an idea of just the scale of the challenge in the Caribbean. There's a lot of opportunities to improve the livelihoods of individuals. So I'd like now to move to Daniel. Daniel Best is from the Caribbean Development Bank, which the European Investment Bank has a long-standing relationship working with the CDB. From a regional perspective, Daniel, we've heard the case of the Dominican Republic, but what is your view as the development bank on how adaptation and resilience, because we mentioned the part about the flood recently in Santo Domingo, can be considered in the projects? And is underinvestment, is this related to lack of access to finance? Or is there something else that makes it a bit more complicated? And lastly, I give you the golden question of how do you create an enabling environment for such investments? So I pass it to you, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kristen, and thanks to the EIB. Um, you know, as we say, it's an EIB CDB family, really. So we're very pleased to be represented here. Look, I think Colin set an excellent context for what's happening in the region, for what's happening in the region in terms of the challenges that we face with many projects. I want to start by saying one of the reasons I'm particularly pleased, is this on? One of the reasons I'm particularly pleased to be here is the EIB was instrumental in ensuring and in really assisting and shepherding CDB along the path of incorporating climate vulnerability and risk assessments into all of our, well, into EIB funded projects. And then we took it even further and decided all recipients of CDB financing must undergo climate risk screening. So to your question about how do we attempt to make projects more resilient by incorporating adaptation measures, the climate science works, right? Let's not overthink this. The climate science works, and it needs to be incorporated at the design stage. So I'll start there. Now, let's jump to the matter of water. This is an extremely important conversation we're having for one reason and one reason only. In all that we discuss in at COP, in all that we discuss in the development community, nothing happens without water. As the head of the National Water Commission said a few months back at a forum we were at, water is life. So we can talk all about energy, we can talk, and these are all important, don't get me wrong, but we're not going too far without water. And it isn't taken seriously enough. We take it for granted. So your question, now, let's jump to your question as it relates to resourcing. Insufficient resourcing, access to resourcing. Colin made the point about debt. The Caribbean Development Bank has 19 borrowing member countries. There is TCI that has a debt to GDP ratio of about 0.75%, which we all envy. There's Cayman, which is a little above that. And then we operate in a region somewhere between 75 to 150% debt to GDP ratio. It is difficult to access resources, certainly loan resources, to do sustainable development work with little or no fiscal space. So then we jump to the other point that we're hearing so much about in the development world now, but we need to mobilize the private sector because that is going to save us. Well, let's talk about the reality of the Caribbean. The reality of the Caribbean is that the vast majority of our water assets are publicly owned. And when we're speaking about adaptation, again, as Colin mentioned, and incidentally, this is the most I've ever quoted him, so he's probably surprised to hear this. But as he rightly said, he's my good friend, as he rightly said, when we're talking adaptation, it is difficult to speak about concessionary resources, etc. Because and bring in the private sector, because it really is government owned. And there are two challenges we face, therefore, with getting the private sector involved. One is adaptation leads to delayed or deferred or avoided loss. So convincing the private sector to invest in something that is actually may materialize way down the road is one conversation that we in the development community need to play a better role in. The other, of course, more important one is that the assets aren't even theirs. The assets are actually owned by the government. And so we really need, and governments do need the concessional resources to drive development in this space. Now, I want to make a point here. I'd like to invite everyone here at some point over the course of the rest of this week to visit the CARICOM Pavilion, to view. There are two pictures in the CARICOM Pavilion, which I only discovered today, are actually of the same location. There's a picture of a lady on a beach in a lounge chair, beautiful beach. There's a picture below it of a lady in a chair in the water. It is the same woman in the same location. She's just celebrating her 28th wedding anniversary, right? She took the first picture on the beach. The second picture, she's in the water and the coastline is way past there. So this thing is happening in our lifetime. Saline intrusion is happening in our lifetime. This is not something that. So I'm saying that, not to rebut the point I made, but to say the private sector does have a role to play in it, because the private sector, certainly as it relates to the importance of tourism in our region, a lot of the natural endowments of the region, such as beaches, etc., and the tourism product is, of course, along the coastline. And so there's an important role in how water is used, which our hotel actors, etc., have a role to play in, and we need to partner with them on that. But in terms of caring for our oceans, and this is why, as you know, Christine, I'm particularly pleased with the new program that EIB is rolling out. I think it was tailor-made for the Caribbean. We've had tremendous success with the climate action line of credit from EIB in the region. So I think mobilizing these resources, getting them into our countries with substantial fiscal constraints, they have appreciated the use of these resources, and I think they go directly to reach the most vulnerable within our countries. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for the sound, because I know sometimes we're speaking and we're not hearing very well, and then it comes and goes. So thank you for your patience with that. So we've heard about decades of underinvestment, knowledge gaps, capacity constraints, be it related to planning, engineering. The audience is listening. Procurement or ESG standards. There's structural market failures as to why the investment is not happening in the sector. And it's important, the project quality in terms of meeting the international standards, ensuring the resilience is in the projects that are supported. So I'd like to turn to Felice from INVA. And here, taking the view of the EU, the Global Gateway Strategy, the three Caribbean EU partnerships, how does the EU approach the challenges of climate change, water and sanitation in the region? And why is it important to redress these market failures? So I pass the mic to you and hope the volume stays consistent.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thanks a lot for giving us the opportunity to brainstorm about what we can do to fight climate change. This is a fight that we do together, and with the EIB in the forefront, in the team spirit and in Team Europe approach. So we work together, close hands, to get in this challenge. Well, listening to all the previous panelists, to Daniel, to Colin, maybe I should just go, just to stand up and go. But no, because we like challenges, and I think because also we, as European Union, we have been in the forefront, and we are basically one of the global leaders in the climate action. You all know that we have established in December 2019 the European Green Deal, that is ambitious, that is looking for partners, is looking for alliances, and I think we have an alliance in fighting climate changes in the Caribbean, in dealing with water and climate change. And this is reflected a little bit into what we call the global gateway strategy that aims at creating partnership in different sectors, including climate change, but also other sectors like digitalization. And to try to boost exactly what you say, Daniel, to try to see how we can involve and how can we boost investment in this topic. Investment using a Team Europe approach. But what does it mean this for the Caribbean? And how it is roll out the global gateway strategy in the Caribbean. And basically, as Christine mentioned in the introduction, is through different partnerships, reinforcing our partnership with the region. And this was done during a ministerial between the European Union and the Caribbean, the 11th of October, launched this partnership, launched by our Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen, the Commission for, I don't know how many of you knows what INPA means because Christine introduced me as INPA, but INPA means exactly this, international partnership. We are not looking for, development cooperation as a traditional mean, but we look for partners, we look for association, we look for, giving creating the right combination to deal with the different topics. And one of the partnerships that we have in the Caribbean is the partnership exactly on the Green Deal, promoting climate resilience, green transition, and of course waste and management and water is a key in this fight. But okay, these are vision. This is a vision. This is a strategy. These are partnership. But how do we implement? How do we try to attract investment? How do we improve and try to support the regulatory framework? Well, this is what is done through our, we have a multi-annual financial framework that is going from 2021 now to 2027. We have bilateral action. We engage with countries in bilateral cooperation, and in the region, for instance, we have a number of countries where we deal when we have chosen climate change, water as a crucial sector, like in Jamaica, like in Cuba. But we also have regional programs, and for the region we have allocated for the period 2021-2027, 87 million for this particular partnership on the Green Deal. But we need to leverage, our the resources that we have, and we try to do it also, and I will explain in a moment, through, you mentioned, Colin, the need for blending and the need for loans, but we also go beyond that, and we want to, explore the possibility of having guaranteed mechanism, sovereign mechanism that we want to work, and we are partnering a lot with the European Investment Bank in that sense, and we'll come back in a moment. But we need an alliance. We need alliance, and it's not by accident that we are here sitting with two of three, because okay, the European Investment Bank is one, but this is something that at bilateral and regional level we have worked together. For instance, with the 5C, we are not only supporting the regional policy framework level, but we are also providing concrete water investment projects in different countries. With the CDB, we are supporting disaster risk reduction, building capacity for effective disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, as well as facilitation of infrastructural improvement to build resilience and stimulate economic activity. We also work with SEDEMA, we work with the World Bank on climate adaptation, resilience agenda. We are now, we have a very long-standing, is a 12-year program, a flagship program on climate change. That is our Euroclima program. That's up to now was only for Latin America. So I could say that for the Caribbean, we have a new kid in the block, because now the Euroclima program has been extended also to the Caribbean. And I think this is really what Euroclima, for its nature, for its the way of designing, you know, will not deal with financing huge infrastructure programs, but definitely can provide technical assistance, can provide grant support, and can basically try to leverage and to try to create a conducive environment for leveraging investment and to increase the climate finance. Climate finance that is needed, because, and for that we need to work with private sector for sure, but we need to work with our, you know, financing institution. And the financing institution, of course, the international financing institution for us our financing institution is the European Development Bank, and we work with the European Development, with the European Investment Bank, with the other, you know, international financing institution from the member states. We work in a team spirit approach, and we work in developing this European Fund for Sustainable Development Funds, that is basic mixing, blending operation, but also trying to work on guarantees on sub-sovereign and sovereign guarantees. So how do we work with the classical blending operation? But we have the instrument that is called the Latin American Caribbean Investment Facility that supports blending operation to customize finance solution according to local needs and support partnership between public and private sector. But what really can make the difference is establishing, you know, guarantee schemes. They will help to reduce the risk of loans. And one of the examples is exactly the Caribbean Sustainable Water Management and Clean Ocean program that we have with the AIB, where, as it was mentioned, we provide 17 million euro for an overall expected mobilization of 400 million euro in 4 to 6 investment programs, which in turn may receive the EU guarantees. And then we come to the last point, because, you know, what we do, for instance, with the Caribbean Sustainable Water Management and Clean Ocean program is one example. But we need to build a solid pipeline. But how do you build a solid pipeline if you do not have a conducive environment? You know, if you do not have a regulatory framework that you know, can interest and can attract investment. So we need to keep working with the government institution, support them in their, you know, policy reform, and support them in making possible that then we can attract you know, other partners to increase the climate finance contribution. And I will stop here for now.
Sorry, before I pass it back to you, can I come in on? I really want to thank Felicia for that intervention, especially as it relates to the importance of technical assistance. Here is something that I believe, that we believe at CDB isn't spoken about enough. And that is that the ability to develop a robust rationale for climate change support in the water sector is more difficult than in other sectors. And here's why we're saying this. To attribute climate change impacts to adverse impacts in the water sector is a little more challenging, because with no climate change, with no adverse weather event, you may have population growth in a space. You may have a new development. You may have increased consumption. You may have adverse watershed management in some space, which all will impact on your water resources, especially in the Caribbean. And then the challenge, and you asked earlier, Kristen, about, you know, what then is the challenge that we face in the region. The challenge then, the onus then comes to our BMCs with limited capacity to undergo extensive technical and feasibility analysis to prove that these concessional climate finance resources are needed in this space, and it is not as a result of some other, contributing factor. You know, and so the importance of TA to prepare, to support the countries of the Caribbean, to build a rationale for climate finance in the water sector cannot be overstated. So I didn't mean to interrupt the flow of the mic, but yeah, I want to make that.
I appreciate you coming in, and I think it's more lively if you immediately grab the mic when you have something to add on with that. But thank you, Felice, for that overview, and Daniel, you know, stressing the importance of the technical assistance in the pre-feasibility, because you need that from the very beginning in order to get to the point where you have a feasibility study where you end up with a bankable project. So it definitely is all linked there. The Minister of Environment of the Dominican Republic, Miguel Serra Hatton, recently said the priority of developing nations is mitigation, while for Latin America, the main priority is adaptation, as they are facing the consequences of climate change. I think that with the hurricane hitting the Dominican Republic, Fiona, what you just mentioned about in Santo Domingo, it's part of your daily life. You're seeing the consequences. Nevertheless, there's less financing available for adaptation than mitigation, in part perhaps because of the reason that Daniel's just saying, that people just don't, you know, they question the need and really why it needs to be done. In the case of the Dominican Republic, Eddie, is there any way you could describe your experience with international funding from GCF and Jeff for project preparation? And, you know, is there an issue with when there's a lack of locally credited entities? Is this an obstacle? So if you could share your thoughts.
Well, thank you also for the question. Let's start by the fact that as lead for small island developing states, it's difficult, first, having the capacities or the institutional arrangements to access to this international funding, specifically for the Green Climate Fund. And it's difficult because we have to transform the financial system that we have locally adapted or that we have locally established in our country first. And second, because there's a lot of new requirements that compliance, let's say, that request us in order to comply with the international requirements that such a funding usually have. For the Dominican Republic, accessing to the Green Climate Fund resources, it has been, let's say, complicated. Yes, definitely. It has been for all of us. But also we've been able to access to the GCF readiness programs, which has been helping the country in order to enhance the capacity of the national designated authority, which is the Ministry of Environment in the Dominican Republic, but also to establish DEA, direct entity for direct access entity, so they can, let's say, have easier ways to access to the money that to the funding that the Green Climate Fund is providing for mitigation, adaptation, and other issues related to climate change in the country. Recently, in this COP as well, the Ministry of Environment has signed an agreement with GGGI, which also entitles a project in order to develop the capacity in the country to accreditate two other entities to direct access, which will help the country in order to develop more projects. But also to de-risk the economy of the country. One of the issues that we are having right now is that with climate change happening every day, we have more risk of investments. And if we don't tend to invest in the right sectors on the proper time, those risks are going to go higher every single time. So having the opportunity to access the funding in order to unlock those opportunities, but also develop those capacity and institutional arrangements to have prepared institutions to be able to fund projects, but also to understand which is the very complex framework that for example, the Green Climate Fund has in order to access those fundings. So let's say that for conclusion, it's been difficult. We've been working with that since the establishment of the Green Climate Fund. It's something we've been accessing to the readiness program in order for different small projects along the way, but we still are lacking of, let's say, higher opportunities that are going to come once we have those entities accredited in the country in the years forward. How many pages? That's one of the things that people think it's easier when we're talking about preparing a document to access to the money or to evaluate the access to the money is very difficult. I mean, you need a lot of funding just to do that. And it's difficult when you have limited capacity in ministries, when you have limited capacity in your technical teams, and you have to create other new capacities inside those. So if you go to the Green Climate Fund, registry, you will find that just a document will have hundreds of pages just to understand which is the need that the country has. And for us to state that is very tricky because we are living climate change and that's undeniable. But for us to just need to state that and put it into paper is even more difficult because sometimes the requirements are not the information that we have available. So that's one of the challenges that we are also having as a small island states.
If it makes you feel better, at the European Investment Bank, we also face challenges with applications and finding the resources to fill them in. So now I'd like to move to Colin. When we were talking about there's limited private capital available for public investments at scale, we understand why, given the issue of the risks. There's some innovative approaches that have come out to try to mobilize such funding. I'd like to highlight that you have mobilized $100 million to build climate resilience of the water sector in Barbados. So I think that this is, a very good concrete example. So if you could discuss your strategy to designing successful water projects that can be implemented, and how MDBs such as the EDB and CDB can partner together to increase the scale and the scope, and most important, the impact of such projects.
Thank you, Kristen. And indeed, I want to, just before I get into that question, to make two quick points. One, Danielle mentioned the issue of the debt, because there is this perception by a lot of lenders that the debt situation in the Caribbean is because of issues related to bad governance or spending. But really, a lot of the debt in the Caribbean is directly linked to loss and damage and destruction from climate-related disasters. So, for example, for the Bahamas, 50% of the Bahamas' debt is directly linked to hurricanes that would have destroyed the country. In the case of Dominica, 85% of the debt. In the case of Belize, every year, in a normal year, 7% losses of GDP just from climate-related disasters. So the issue of access to the concessional financing is not just because of the cheap money, but it's directly linked to the losses we're suffering from climate change. Now, yes, the 5Cs is an accredited entity to the Green Climate Fund, like the Caribbean Development Bank is. We're the only two regional direct access entities. And we have been successful in mobilizing 100 million, actually a little bit over 100 million for the government of Barbados from the Green Climate Fund. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, the climate rationale is tough to do, and it links to the issue of having the data and having the vulnerability and risk analyses that are required. And I would like to say to the Dominican Republic, while you're building your national capacity to have direct access entity in country, you should have a parallel approach where you approach regional and international direct access entities to scale. Because if you look at the time it takes an accredited entity, after they get accredited to actually get their first project, it's about 3+ years. So you don't want to put all your eggs in any one basket. Now, in terms of the 5 Cs, we've taken a strategic approach that we would really want to invest in a single sector in terms of climate resilience. So what do I mean by that? We try to design projects that cross multiple sectors that all link to building resilience. And for us, we feel that we have a competitive advantage in pursuing projects that are within the water, energy, and food nexus because of the co-benefits, and those 3 areas are all critical to building climate resilience in CARICOM member states. And I'll tell you how. By using this approach, there is room to crowd in MDB support and perhaps even private sector support. So the first thing is that we have a project in Barbados. It's called the Reduce, Reuse, and Recycle Project CR Cruise. That is a 50 million project, 40 million in grants, and 10 million in concessional loans at 3% with a 2-year grace period. And what we're doing is essentially we're upgrading the Bridgetown sewage treatment plant to tertiary standards, and the energy that is going to power that process is renewable energy. Now, if I went to the GCF and I wrote only a proposal to do renewable energy for upgrading that plant, they would send me to the private sector. But the project is not about the renewable energy, because in truth, the emissions that we will reduce from that plant in Barbados is negligible in the global space. But it's a means to an end. Because for us in the region, and I think CDB made this point this morning, renewable energy is a key part of our resilience strategy. Because when you have renewable energy and there is an issue with the power generation because of storms, you still have the energy to pump the water. Now, so that's the first part. There's going to be a pipeline of this project. The pipeline is going to take the treated water to the agricultural part of Barbados. In the rainy season, there are going to be managed injection wells that are going to recharge the aquifer, which reduces the demand, which replenishes the demand in the aquifer. And in the dry season, that water is going to be used by the farmers to irrigate their fields. So it's reducing the demand on the aquifer. Now that is directly linked to food security. So there's renewable energy, there is dealing with the water pressure by replenishing the aquifer, and the water that would otherwise be washed out to sea from the sewage system is now being recycled and reused. So it's dealing with water security. Now, if I can make the case to a donor or to a bank that because I now have reliable supply of water to my fields, I can link that to my productivity on those fields. And because I can link my productivity to having this issue of managing the drought risk on my farms, I can now go to a financing entity and say, look, I've reduced the risk from a climate change point of view. Now the bank can be more interested, because now the bank is going to look at the whole picture and see that we've already de-risked a lot of what they would be worried about. Because we had to develop the climate rationale to show that the situation in Barbados is going to get worse because of climate change. We're seeing temperatures going up. We're seeing rainfall becoming very variable. We are seeing rainfall becoming very less. And we're also seeing salinity in the aquifer increase. And we've been able to show this very, very definitively. We have a graph that shows you that over the last 30 years, in the years when it's the driest years, the salinity levels spike. And so that is the climate rationale that we are showing. So by having a project that we have to do the rationale that wraps in energy, wraps in water, and wraps in food security. You have all the data to show how those are interlinked. Now you've de-risked investments at various parts. So MDBs can come in and fund now the energy portion of these types of investments. Because there's a rate of return there. Those are pretty simple to do, but it's going to be a part of a larger project. You could also come in at the pipeline level, where you're now building that pipeline, investing in SCADA and other technology to reduce non-revenue water loss, which then improves the fiscal position of the utilities in terms of dealing with the repayment of those loans. And then, of course, the blended finance. I keep going back to that. The idea that you use grants along with concessional financing to be able to roll out these projects. And then in terms of EIB, again, you can see when you have the whole project that has co-benefits for multiple critical areas for resilience, where through a development finance institution, where monies can go to the DFCs and then can be off-lended at concessional rates to, for example, the farmers who would have benefited from a project that involved other donors who have de-risked the water investment and the energy investment. So what I'm saying is we need to look beyond single sector investment. We need to wrap it up into a very coherent, logical, and rational climate resilience program and crowd in investors where they feel most comfortable. But it's a part of one project, right? I think that's the strategic approach we've done, and that's how we've been able to raise over 100 million in climate finance from the Green Climate Fund, of which 67 million is in grants. And then on the other side, we have one of the best implemented projects in the GCF portfolio. And I want to come back to a point that Kristen made, because procurement is the single largest challenge to moving money once it's approved. And when you have strong procurement systems, you do have greater expenditure. And my last point, I want to thank the EU, because we have worked with them for quite a while in terms of looking at the water sector. In fact, we do have a 12 million euro project right now with the EU GCCA, in which we are investing in water infrastructure in 8 CARICOM member states. And while the scale is small, what it does, again, it de-risks future investments where we can go for scale. So the challenge or the opportunity that I think exists is I would love to be able to sit where on the public sector side, the 5 Cs as a delivery partner, mobilizes financing at scale to access grant resources, but in the design stage, we find a role for a CDB that can look at resources that can scale various parts of this project at EIB, either directly or through development finance entities for off-lending to the end beneficiaries, for which there's a clear business case, and for which all of your risk would have been mitigated from the public sector or the grant portion.
Wow, that's a lot, and it's in terms of ideas of opportunities and a vision, which I think we have to have a vision of the opportunities and how to put it into place. So thank you I hope that we end this panel thinking about the opportunities and the potential that's there and how we can work together to achieve it. Now, water demand is supposed to go up 30% more or less by 2050 in the region. This is due to the industrial uses, but it's creating an urgent need for innovation to supplement the dwindling volume of the fresh water in a sustainable fashion. One area that we hear about is the issuance of green bonds and how this could try to bring in investment into the area. And here I'd like Felice to speak a bit about the taxonomy for green and sustainable investments, that's such as the one developed by the EU, and how this can contribute to mainstream climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience into projects. And if you could end mentioning about the green bonds and how you have initiatives in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christine, again. I think we need to do an introduction, because we all have to agree, and it was also said here, that low and middle income countries face a substantial financial gap. And this substantial financial gap, investment gap, cannot be filled by public money. That's a fact. To fill this gap with public money, bridging, the investment gap and achieving, infrastructure, actions that are SDG related, and at the same time maintain, the track on the climate action. I think according to the G20, we will need per year 1.3 trillion euro. And then on the other hand, we have now recently, we all know we have really a global economic slowdown, negative financial outlook. So, this means that investors are trying to pull out from the riskiest places. This is definitely a fact. But I think we believe that sustainable finance can play a role to bridge this financing gap and to support our partner in implementing, in financing their national determined contribution. So what is the experience that we had in the European Union? We have basically taken major steps ahead to build a conducive system for sustainable finance. We have the EU Taxonomy regulation, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and Benchmark Regulation that we have established in order to increase the transparency and provide tools both to investors and to investees to identify sustainable investment opportunity and to, for the investees to basically build a favorable environment. Because this is what it is, a taxonomy. It's beneficial for the investor and it's beneficial for the investees. Because we have basically, we provide a transparent and credible list of green activities. It helps investor in that sense to avoid greenwashing and to make informed decision. But at least, on the other hand, when you talk about the investee, about the beneficiary, by providing clear principles and requirements that they need to fulfill, which allow them to claim with certain activities when they have, there is no reputational risk, diminish the reputational risk. But the fact is that this taxonomy, this in the EU, but in many other jurisdictions, remain a voluntary tool. It's not mandatory. And that's for us, it's something that it's very important. It's a tool to help investors to make informed investment decisions, reduce transaction costs, and channel private capital with where it's most needed. So I think basically, to sum up, a taxonomy can help to provide the necessary clarity to the markets, to avoid greenwashing, to reduce transaction costs, and ultimately help channels or even mainstream capital and for climate action. And you mentioned about the green bonds. The green bonds, I think, is a very important tool that is climate finance tools to attract and scale up private investment projects. So we can the countries can meet the Paris Agreement's objectives. And for this reason, I think the European Union is committed to support the partner countries, low and middle income countries, to develop markets for sustainably related bonds such as green bonds. As an information, the European Union is the larger issuer of green bonds worldwide and is financing the whole recovery program next EU generation via green bond. We have launched during the African Summit the Global Green Bond Initiatives. That is a flagship Team Europe initiative under preparation, and is a co-creation between different, and the EIB is one of them. It's a co-creation among several European Union international financing institutions. The objective, of course, as I said at the beginning, is to support green bond in the partner countries, and therefore to mobilize more capital from institutional investors to finance their green projects. But of course, not everywhere, not every market is suitable, and not every country is suitable to have green bonds. If, for instance, if we look at Africa, the green bond market is increasing, is growing. For instance, Nigeria was one of the one of the few countries that has issued the green bond at sovereign level, but the total green bond issuance still represent less than 1% of the global green bond issuance. So I think we need to help the countries, and for this reason we need to provide also, we are ready as European Union to provide support for countries to develop a framework that is sustainable for their own context. So this is what we plan to do, is in the making, and we will continue working on that, and we believe in this.
Thank you. Now I'd like to move to the importance of shared standards and best practices, because I think one of the challenges working with many different MDBs is what eligibility criteria can differ. What may look the same may in fact be different. I think the idea of we receive the message to have a more coherent approach and work together in the system to have common climate and sustainability objectives. I think we've improved over the years. I'm sure that on the receiving end, you probably think we still have some more of a way to go. But I think that in order for CDB and others to leverage the climate finance potential in the water and sanitation sector, certain toolkits out there can be helpful to ensure that we're all using the same language. Could you speak a bit about the Water Finance Coalition toolkit, and perhaps how this could help CDB leverage its potential in the water and sanitation sector?
Yeah, thanks for that, Christine. One of the, or I should start by saying, fragmentation. Fragmentation is, I think, we in the MDB community, specifically in the region, have been nailed to the cross of fragmentation, deservedly so in many cases. Yeah, because we face the challenge in limited capacity in our ministries in the region, where on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, they would have dealt with IDB, Thursday and Friday, CDB, and the next Monday, with the World Bank, and all different requirements to access these resources. So I think certainly what we have done, and I'm speaking here CDB and EIB, I think we have found a common ground in terms of intermediating resources and agreeing on thresholds such that if projects exceed a certain limit, then we would utilize, we would have joint appraisal missions as we're undertaking shortly in Belize, etc. So I think there's certainly a lot of scope for harmonization, a lot of scope for seeking to utilize the toolkit in how we go about appraising and undertaking due diligence, really, for these projects. Because ultimately, we all want the same thing for these projects. I want to add one other little wrinkle, perhaps to be a tad controversial. if not too controversial, and that is, you know, I'm very pleased that Colin mentioned the success in Barbados and the use of climate financing in other spaces other than just the hardcore water project. One of the things we got to push back from climate finance providers is that, and this is not the ABM speaking about here, let me be clear, is that the resources, climate finance resources, should not be used for other sustainable development ends. No, that is wonderful. Huh? We understand the thinking that went into that decision. However, if we were to break this down to, I'm going to call our Vice President of Operations, he's sitting right there, he always tells us this, let's get everything back to first principles. What are we trying to achieve? So, if it is that we're saying climate finance should not be used for other sustainable development principles, but we have challenges in the water sector. Sometimes the best way to start winning is to stop losing. Why should we not be allowed to use climate finance resources to deal with non-revenue water? If we just stopped leakages in the region, if we just use some of these resources to stop leakage, we have in the Caribbean, for those who may not know, we have an average of between 40 to 45, 50% non-revenue water losses. In some cases, as high as 70%. Now, if we can just address that, because here's why I want to just stick a pin on this one, Christine. Because ground and surface water will be impacted by climate change in different ways, in different points of time, absolutely. However, the plant that is already in the ground, the plant that already exists, that we are producing twice as much water to feed our populace, our residents. If we can just capture some of that water in the absence of any climate change impacts, we would have gone a long way to reducing even the need for climate financing down the road. So I just think that, you know, we like in the MDB community to talk to each other, and we're all very, very sharp and intelligent people. But sometimes I think we just got to be a little bit logical with certain things. Yeah, thank you.
And I think Danielle is absolutely right. But what I think we have learned is how to put the issue of non-revenue water, to make it an issue in terms of water security in the context of climate change. Because in Barbados, we are actually using GCF investments to actually reduce non-revenue water by 80%, because we put it in the envelope of climate resilience and climate adaptation. Because what you're saying is absolutely right. The developed countries want to have what we call in the region an artificial distinction between development finance and climate finance. It might be black and white for them, but for us, it's absolutely gray. And in fact, they're intertwined. Our development is inherently tied to our climate resilience. And unfortunately, however, we can say that until we gray, unless we have the rules changed for access to the mechanisms under the convention. And this is the context. The COP is where that happens. The COP is what gives guidance to the Adaptation Fund, to the Green Climate Fund, to the GEF, and so on, so that the rules are changed. If the rules aren't changed, then we have to find creative ways to make the case, to say that, look, development and climate resilience are one and the same, and we've wrapped it in a climate resilience envelope. I think that's what we have to do while we work on getting the rules changed.
Well, I think in the case of Barbados, you'll be happy to know that we've been discussing with BWA the social aspect, because a lot of this non-revenue water are in, people who have built in areas where it's not regulated to actually to live. And I'd like to just bring in the digitalization element, because with the water losses, when you can have areas to detect where there are leaks, also it's an important way to reduce those losses. Now, hopefully you're ending with seeing that it's not just a sea of opportunity, there's an ocean of opportunity out there. But I think that it's important to think about what can be done, specific actions that can be done. I think when I was looking over the bio of Eddie, he had mentioned that to be the change that you want to see, and that the importance of that. I think here, if you could just, I'll pass the mic down, and just mention one action that you would like to see challenge someone, be it the legislation in the Dominican Republic to pass that legislation that you mentioned, Eddie, that's pending. There's one action that is concrete action that if you could, have a magic wand and have it happen, what would it be?
We wouldn't be happy having a lot of these conversations if, as humans, but also as people in the political field, we will be able to look beyond our own perspective. Understanding other people, other country perspective is the crucial key of what's having us here, and sometimes having this way back forward conversation that doesn't take us anywhere. So looking beyond what we really know is other things I will wish we could have as human beings and as people leading with public policies. Because many of the things we think it's already written. Like, there's a rule for everything. And there's processes, there are rules, there's mechanisms to access to the different opportunities and funding arrangement we have. But there's also new non-predictable things that we are facing every day that will need to a change of paradigms. So I will say that looking at that development with a change of paradigms and a change of vision will be what can take us forward in this fight against climate change.
Okay. Well, I think we have to, as I said at the beginning, we have to work all together. We are already doing it. We need to intensify our relationship to put, forces together with the financing institution, with the development organization, with governments, with local communities, with partners, all private sector, civil society, and to see how we can really do together all these things.
Speed. That's it. Speed. I laud Colin and 5Cs, but I know they started a little while ago, and it's been a marathon for them. We are, maybe on the back stretch coming around with Bahamas, trying to do a similar thing they do for Barbados, but we don't have 6 years. We don't have the region. In the last 6 years, we've had Maria, Irma, Nicole, Lisa, Dorian, Ian, 5 category 5s. What's going to happen in the next 6 years? Speed. That's my closing word. Speed. Thank you.
I would say innovation. I think what you started, Kristen, by talking about COVID, the world got together and solved the issue around developing a vaccine because of the destruction that COVID was having all over the world. And it is clear that when the world wants to, they can come together. So we can solve the fragmentation that exists among development partners. It shouldn't be difficult without giving up accountability. And so if we solve the issue of the supply chain frustrations by coming up with one criteria, a set of criteria that is utilized by all the entities, it simplifies the process. If the outcome we want is to increase flow, whether that's in private sector or public sector, this can be solved. It shouldn't be difficult.
Well, thank you very much. I think we should remember water is life, that this is a very important sector. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so the question and answers that I promised, unfortunately, we don't have time for that. But I welcome anyone to contact the European Investment Bank, contact the CDB if you have projects, and we'll look at them and see how we can, as a partner with INPA and with the 5 Cs, to work together to find solutions. So thank you very much to everyone, and a special thanks to Yves Ferreira in our office in the Dominican Republic who put this panel together. Thank you.